I've spent years inside investment banking, reviewing CVs, interviewing candidates, and seeing where strong people get filtered out. I've also worked closely with students and lateral movers trying to break into banking from adjacent careers. And in this video, I'm going to compress years of screening logic into a clear framework. And it's not just going to be how to build a good-looking CV, it's going to be how to build one that actually secures you interviews. I'll cover how finance CVs are screened, why most CVs fail, and how to build one that gets you taken seriously. If you're new here, I'm Haris Zamir, an investment banker and CFA charter holder, and I help people break into banking through my charter mastery program. So let's start with how finance CVs are actually screened. And contrary to popular belief, when you submit your application or your CV, it does not go straight to a hiring manager. It goes through two filters. The first is a system and the second is a human. Now the system parses your CV and extracts information and compares it to the job description looking for fit. And the human is usually a junior banker who's tasked with reducing the size of the pile of CVs. If the human can't see relevance quickly, your application doesn't progress. And therefore the truth is most CVs don't fail because a candidate is weak, they fail because the match is not made obvious enough quickly enough. And once you understand this, you stop writing your CV as a biography and start writing it as a document designed to pass screening. So let's now look at why most CVs fail, and the first point is hygiene. The truth is finance CVs follow a fairly standard structure, and if you deviate from this, you introduce risks. So things like 2 columns, pictures, text boxes, graphics, they look nice, but they actually make it more difficult for the system to extract information which counts against you. And this is essentially what's described as the applicant tracking system, or ATS, and if you fail the screening, your application never even gets to a human. So it's crucial that you get this part right. Now we'll cover the correct structure later, and we've provided a free template which is ATS safe, and that is linked in the description. But now I want to look at a side-by-side of a good versus bad example. So you can see a side-by-side of 2 CVs here, and on the left-hand side you can see this very nice looking one which you may be drawn to, and on the right-hand side you can see a very boring looking one which unfortunately I'm going to tell you is the right approach. But we're not going to go through this in a lot of detail here. As I said, we'll look at the structure and content later on. But I just want to highlight a few key distinctions here as to why the one on the left is not the way to go versus the one on the right being the correct approach. So on the left, you can see top left, it's got a picture. I wouldn't put this on there, makes parsing much more difficult and extraction more difficult. Then you can see there's sort of 3 different colors and fields. There is 2 columns. There are some icons on there. And generally speaking, although this looks beautiful and may be appropriate for something like interior design or a design-led career, for banking, which is super boring, comparatively at least, this is not the right way to go. So it looks great, but I would definitely avoid this. Now on the right, you can see this is much more boring and single column, so no 2-column approach, standardized headings, standardized fonts, no images. So even though this is boring and a human being probably doesn't like looking at this, the system does like looking at this, and that's what you're optimizing for. Okay, so the second reason most CVs fail is because they fail to showcase fit. And the point here is that your CV must be relevant to the role you're applying for, and it's your job to make this explicit. Now here's where so many people go wrong. They put a bunch of information on their CV and they assume that the reader or the system will infer the link to that job description. And this is not the way it works. Screeners are there to validate fit, they are not there to infer it. So everything that goes on your CV must be there for a reason, and it must be clearly mapped to the job description and the requirements. Furthermore, it must be on 1 page. Banking CVs, finance CVs should not be longer than 1 page unless you are an executive with years and years of experience, and even then it's debatable. But for the majority of people, 1 page forces prioritization. So everything on there must be relevant to the role you're applying for. Okay, let's now look at an example of relevance and ensuring that your bullets are relevant to what they've asked for in the job description. And we'll look at a description for a LevFin analyst role at JP Morgan. So this is a snip from LinkedIn, and you can see at the top here we have job responsibilities, and at the bottom we have required qualifications, capabilities, and skills. And we're not going to go through it in a lot of detail, but I just want to call a few sort of key things out, right? So the first line shows that we want to, and we'll just keep this open here, that we want to see a reference to modeling, right? Next one, cash flow and asset-based debt capacity. So these are a few sort of debt metrics and debt terminology. Then we have things like term sheets, presentation materials, and due diligence. So these are the kind of terms we want to call out in our bullets. And of course, sometimes we have done them in our role, sometimes we haven't. But it's our job to find a link and to get them into the bullets, essentially. At the bottom, quantitative and analytical skills. We can see here excellent written and verbal communication. These things should be articulated through some example, but you would try and squeeze in the terminology where you can, because the applicant tracking system, or essentially the screening system, is looking for these keywords. And this is the point. So bullets should bring these out wherever possible. I'm not going to go through all the other points, but what I'm going to come to now is bullets that sound fine, but don't answer the roles question. And this is very, very common. So what you're going to see here is an example of bullets that actually look okay, right? These actually on paper, they look all right, but are they actually going to perform well in a screening process? So the first one, supported senior team members with day-to-day financial analysis, okay, and reporting tasks. Supported, not very active, pretty passive, doesn't assume ownership, etc. We're going to look at this in the third reason that CVs fail. Gained exposure to corporate finance, that might be relevant, and internal decision making. Work closely with cross-functional stakeholders to support business initiatives. Assisted in preparing management reports and internal presentations. Okay, presentations might get dinged, but realistically, these look okay. But if we recall the kinds of things we wanted to see, all of these bullets might be true, but none of them are answering the question this role is asking. There's nothing about modeling, credit, leverage, deals. And so the screener has no reason to keep reading, whether it's a system or a person. Once they scan this, this is so passive that they're like, okay, fine, this is all good, but this is not what we need. Done. You're out of the process. So we'll look at how we actually position this properly later on. But I just wanted to emphasize that even though bullets might sound fine, it does not mean they're good bullets. We have to consider what they're looking for in this job description, the keywords, and we need to get them as naturally into our work as possible, into our CV as possible. So as I said, relevance is very important. We're going to discuss this in the context of a proper CV later on. But the third reason that CVs fail is because they fail to make an impact. And the main mistake that people make here is that their CV is descriptive, not persuasive. They demonstrate or discuss the responsibilities that they had, but they don't show ownership and impact. And you only have 10 to 15 seconds, at least initially, to make a positive impression. And you really need to grasp that. So your job is not to just document your role. You need to hold the reader's hand and show that you belong in this process. And you do that through demonstrating ownership and impact. And this is through the bullet structure that you will employ. Now we'll go into this, but generally speaking, you need to structure it as strong verb, action, result, and some kind of quantification where possible. And we will literally look at examples of this as we step through the CV later on. But broadly speaking, something that people struggle with here is the art of humble bragging. They don't want to overstate or emphasize their contribution. And the truth is that this game is honestly, rightly or wrongly, played in this way. Everybody is exaggerating their impact. Of course, you don't want to make things up, you don't want to lie, but you do want to sort of stretch the truth and try and introduce impactful and powerful words and outcomes and achievements into essentially every single bullet one way or another, again tied closely to the job description, and make sure that the read is compelling, that people look at your CV and think, wow, I'd really love to at least have a conversation with this person. If you decide to opt out of this and just downplay everything, the truth is you are not going to get through screen, so you have to get comfortable with this. Now, I'm not going to labor this point anymore. We're going to look at some great examples shortly, but I want to emphasize or touch upon what truly changes outcomes when it comes to CVs and interviews. The reality is interviews do not come from simply sending out more applications. Yes, volume does matter, but the chances of an interview increase when your CV does three things: pass basic hygiene, make the match clear, and make an impact quickly. That's the spine. If you can get these three things right, the chances of you progressing to the interview round increase massively. Now, if you're listening to this and it feels uncomfortably familiar, it's probably not an effort problem, it's a screening problem. And this is exactly the kind of thing we help diagnose at Charter Mastery. So if you're interested in knowing more, there is a link to a free strategy call below. So now we're at the good part. Let's look at how to build a CV that gets you taken seriously. And this is the part that people often rush. They get straight into tweaking bullets or using templates and so on without pausing to reflect on what their CV is actually trying to accomplish. So let's slow this down and walk through it properly, and I will use an example CV to bring this to life. Now, a quick caveat, this is not a perfect CV. It's been designed with deliberate imperfections so you can see how decisions are made. And that's kind of the whole point. If I show you a perfect ex-Goldman analyst CV, you won't learn anything, because the truth is most people are not coming with perfect profiles. So that's the whole point of this video. Okay, let's look at the profile behind the example. So we're looking at a lateral mover targeting a leverage finance analyst role. So it's the job description that we actually saw earlier on. And this person has a background in professional services, due diligence / transaction work. So they're coming from Big Four professional services. They did a corporate finance internship. They worked a part-time sales role at university. They have a chemistry degree, their CFA is in progress, and they've done the FMVA, which is a modeling course. Okay, so the first thing I want to call out, and we're looking at an example CV here that we'll scroll up and down on. But the first thing is that you want to build a master CV first and once, and put all the effort into creating that and align it to a particular job family. So assume you want to apply to sort of credit type roles, debt heavy type roles. Build one master CV with that in mind. So you would look at a series of job descriptions and their expectations. You would do the exercise of mapping your existing experience to that. And then once you've built this well once, you can then tailor it very quickly for each and every application, assuming it's still in the debt space. So I want to emphasize the importance of building one proper master CV, and thereafter you will tailor per application. And this makes the whole process much more streamlined. With that in mind, let's go through each of these sections and discuss the most important points. So the first thing up at the top is our header. Now, I don't want to labor this point a lot, but you'd put your full name at the top, and thereafter location. I see people put their full address here, you know, first line, second line, postcode or zip code or whatever it is. You don't need to do that. Just put whatever city or, you know, wherever you are. So it could be London, New York, whatever it is. That's enough. You don't need the full address. Contact number, make sure you include the area code, so +1 for the US, +44 for the UK, wherever you are. Email address is fine. Try and use Gmail or something similar. It looks professional. And LinkedIn here, make sure that you hyperlink this. So you don't want to put the full URL. It looks really ugly. Just right click LinkedIn and enter the link to your profile so the person can click straight through to your profile. It looks much cleaner and more professional. Let's switch this to the highlighter tool. Up at the top here, we have our positioning statement or profile summary. Now, I want to make a point on this, which is that this section is only really important if you're a lateral mover. So if you are a student and you're still either at college or university or recently graduated, you are not likely to have a lot of experience to speak to, and also you're likely to be entering a structured intake. So targeting something like an analyst program, graduate program, whatever it is. And the pipeline into that and the process is pretty standardized. And so you don't really need to labor this point too much. A lot is going to be obvious from your education and your experience. When you're a lateral mover, you then need to sort of explain those few years post-college or post-university and what you've been doing and how it maps to a banking role. So this is generally only really required if you are a lateral mover, which this person is. So as we described, they are targeting a leverage finance analyst role, and they've described themselves as a candidate. So you kind of squeeze in leverage finance straight away, right? Which is a bit of a ding. And they have experience in transaction due diligence and corporate finance. Both of these are relevant things per the job description. So nice to squeeze these in early and showcases that you already have some of the skill set that they're looking for. Focused on credit analysis, financial modeling, and deal execution, all very relevant to leverage finance. So we want to squeeze these in upfront, of course, assuming they are true, but this immediately positions us as credible. Then, background includes sponsored backed diligence work, while leverage finance faces into sponsors, which is essentially private equity. So again, you're showing that you're familiar with the terminology. So again, nice to squeeze that in, and you've got hands-on modeling exposure, formal finance training through level 1 and CFA level 1 and FMVA. So this is, 2 to 3 lines, super impactful. Maps us nicely from the experience that we already have to where we want to go, without, spanning and taking up too much of the CV. So a positioning statement, if you are a lateral mover, should be 2 to 3 lines, impactful and tied directly to what they expect to see in the job description. Let's now switch to professional experience. So we're looking at this section now. Something I want to call out here is just a hygiene point. And if you are a student, you will likely put your education first and then your professional experience, just by virtue of the position you are in life, right? They expect to see your education first. Once you are out of college, university, and you have been in work, you will then list your professional experience first, because this is the more relevant part of your CV now. So it's just an ordering thing. This person, as we discussed, is an actual lateral mover. They already have a few years of experience, and therefore it makes sense for them to put professional experience first. So now let's look a little bit at the structure. Now, the first thing I want to call out is there is red and green text on here. Your actual CV should not have red and green text. This is just me making it clear which bullets are better and which ones are worse. So it's just for demonstration purposes. Your CV should be entirely black. Okay, so you put the name of the firm here, and you would put the city and country here. You may want to also include how long you've been working there, especially if it's still present. I've omitted it here, but you can see the structure here. And so you can follow the same thing here and put whenever you started to present, and that's totally fine. And then you put whatever role you had here. So that's just, a formatting point. Here you see the bullets that we've included, and there's two relevant sections to this first experience. And you can see it actually takes a fair amount of our CV, right? We've got two sections. First, some generic bullets here, and then we've got select deal experience here. Now, the first thing is the bullets at the top are more general points that have been applicable across your time there. And we want to map these tightly to what we would expect, or the job description expects to see. These first two bullets, these red ones, let's go through these. First and foremost, red bullets are not the best bullets, and these are pretty passive in nature. So you'll see here we've got firstly the words, the first word when we start these. Sorry, my highlighter is being funky. Supported and assisted, very passive terminology and not something that shows impact. And we discussed this earlier on. So we always want to start with something that is much more impactful: performed, built, prepared, highlighted. These show ownership, show impact, that you actually made a difference to the team. You weren't just helping somebody else who was making the difference. That's what the key distinction is here. And it's an easy fix. So we always want to start with some kind of impactful, strong verb, right? We did something, right? Supported, assisted, responsible for, like, this is super passive language that we don't want to use. Now, these bullets at the top, you can see here, we did squeeze in financial due diligence for corporate and private equity clients with analysis of historic financial performance and preparation of client deliverables. So generic, right? So these are so generic. Now we look at the green bullets. Perform financial due diligence on 6 sponsor backed. Okay, 6 is some quantification. Sponsor backed is what we want to see in leverage finance and corporate transactions. More than 100 million EV, right? Again, quantification and a simple way to quantify, because sometimes people try and quantify by putting in unrealistic metrics. So like they increased revenue by 50%, or they cut costs by 25%, or increased productivity by 75%. If you can actually prove that, right, then that's fine. But squeezing them in when they're not true just opens the door for you to be quizzed on them. People will ask you questions, and if you can't answer it, it's not going to go well for you. So yes, quantify, but quantify in a realistic and defensible way. Now, we could look at the next one. Reviewed analyses, including adjusted EBITDA, quality of earnings. These are two things that they want to see in leverage finance. So you've squeezed them in, great. Net debt, normalized cash flow analysis. This is great, right? Cash flow sensitivities, leverage considerations. These are all things that they want to see in leverage finance. So you can only understand that they want to see this by actually evaluating the job descriptions and then doing the mapping exercise. So you can see here that these green bullets are good bullets. Like this is exactly the type of style we want to follow. You'll also see that they're all on one line. This is a bit of a formatting point. It's not super important, but honestly, any little incremental improvement you can make to your CV, you should make. Try and keep each bullet to making one point. And if you can do that and keep it to one line, it makes it so much easier to read and scan and make an impact. Remember, initially you only have 10 to 15 seconds to make an impact. If you do that, then they'll go deeper and read it properly, and you can make it much easier to skim your CV by constructing it in this way. So that covers our sort of general experience section. Then we have our select deal experience. Now here I've only included one deal. This is the typical way that investment banks structure their CV or like to see deal experience described. And this relates to a specific deal. Here for this person, it is a sponsor-backed acquisition in business services. They did financial due diligence, and it's 150 to 250 million EV. Now I put illustrative here, right? These are not genuine, but you've included some quantification here, which is nice. And otherwise, we are positioning this in the way that investment bankers think. And this is great, right? Now you are talking about a specific deal that you did. We did analyze 3 years of historic financials for this name, assessed earnings sustainability and cash generation, working capital dynamics, cash flow sensitivities. We again see adjusted EBITDA, net debt, downside risk. These are all things, you're speaking the language and you're positioning it in a way that makes it much easier for them to interpret, and they love this. If you haven't come from a deal team before, this is a bit difficult. But you can also position it as something like select project experience. So maybe you worked on specific projects that had similar type of impact in, on revenue or costs and so on and so forth. And you can then structure it in that way if you're coming from something that is more consulting led, so on and so forth. But getting comfortable with this type of presentation, it makes a big difference, honestly. So that, as we said already, the professional services component of this or experience covers the majority of our professional experience. Then we have our other two experiences here and here. Now, the first one, mid-market advisory firm, we did an internship. Of course, we probably only spent a few weeks in an internship, so we're not going to have loads of bullets. But again, you can see I've included red and green bullets. The red ones are not the best. Again, we're using terminology like assisted. But the green ones, you can see here, we are using terminology like built and analyzed, and with 3-statement financial models, 3+ transactions, deal analysis, cash flow, leverage, valuation sensitivities, capital structure. And this is great, right? This is the type of terminology we want to see, and we're not overdoing it with the quantification. I want to actually just head back up here for 1 second to this bullet, which was supported here. You might have seen this and thought, why is it okay to use supported there? Look, sometimes you will need to use it, and particularly if you're trying to incorporate things that were not part of your day job, but you worked with other teams in some capacity that you can then use to incorporate certain terminology that would help you pass the screening. So this is a bit of a strategic bullet, this one, because we ourselves weren't involved in transaction risk or capital structure, but we worked with deal teams who were focused on that, and our analysis helped them. So we are supporting them, and therefore we can squeeze this in. And if someone discusses this with us, we can, articulate how it fits in. But more importantly, the incorporation of capital structure and transaction risk and whatnot may well ding the screening, which helps us get through to the next stage. So it is a bit strategic sometimes. Head down to our B2B services firm sales associate. Now I want to talk about this one because, as we discussed, this person actually held a sales advisor role at university or college, and that is of course not directly tied to leverage finance. However, we can take this as an opportunity to make other points, showcase other skills that are somewhat transferable. So it's a repositioning exercise. Now, what we might say is, well, first and foremost, this red bullet is not what we want to see as ever. Responsible for sales outreach and client communication. Terrible. We're not showcasing anything here. We can reposition that same bullet as manage 50 to 70 outbounds per day, tracking leads, follow-ups in a structured CRM under tight deadlines. Consistently achieve 10 to 130% of monthly sales targets by adapting messaging to client needs and objections. Again, something that is showcasing transferable skills and quantification and showing that you're actually a good salesman, which is relevant to banking in some way, shape, or form. So that covers our professional experience section. As you can see, it takes up the majority of our CV with nice spacing in between, consistent spacing to ensure that it looks pleasing on the eye, which is very important as well. Okay, so I want to now touch on these sections at the bottom, and I should probably just clean this up. So the first one is education. Now, I want to emphasize, if you are doing something like a professional qualification such as the CFA, I would include this here because it deserves more respect and time and attention than a modeling course on the side. So a professional qualification is a lot more involved. And so anything like CFA, IMC, ACCA, any other qualification like that should go here. Highlighter, name of the institution, what level we're at. And then if we've done something like a first time pass, 90th percentile score, include this here. If you've excelled in any particular subject, put them here because this can ding and show relevance. So for example, for leverage finance, fixed income and financial statement analysis are very relevant because you will be looking at bonds, you will be structuring bonds, you will also be analyzing financial statements, cash flows, and so on. So both of these are very relevant. So I would include that. Then you've got your university name, your degree, your grade, and any academic achievements, you can include them here. This one's pretty standard, right? Doesn't need a lot of discussion. But if you did certain things like case competition, so on and so forth, include them here. Finally, the part at the bottom, which is not the most important, but is somewhat neglected sometimes. And we do need to spend some time on this. So the first thing to call out is your technical skills. Here, you want to map these to what they actually want to see. So don't just cram so many different technical skills that you have totally unrelated to the role. So for a LevFin role, of course, various types of financial modeling are relevant. Valuation and sensitivity analysis is relevant. Excel is relevant. Bloomberg is relevant. Cap IQ and PowerPoint. All of these are actually relevant, and often you'll see these listed in the job description. If you have experience with them or you've taken like a side course or something like that, this is where to put them. Projects and certifications. This is where you put things like modeling courses, and if you've done any independent projects focused on any specific things, you can actually squeeze in terminology here. So say we didn't have experience with cash flow analysis and valuation scenarios, we can put independent projects here to at least ding the screening and get us through, and then we can hopefully express to someone, to a real human, that we're capable at this. Languages, you do want to put in here, especially if you're proficient in some. There's a growing need for people who are bilingual or trilingual and so on. So if you have other language capabilities, include them. And finally, interests. This is not super important, but it's a good opportunity for you to introduce some conversation points. So keep these, professional. Don't include things that could be perceived to be strange, but ultimately something like competitive tennis, chess, volunteering with a local nonprofit, podcasts, hiking, rock climbing. This exists to hopefully be a conversation starter or a point of common ground with your interviewer, because you can then bridge that professional to personal gap with someone. And if you can make a great impression during an interview, this is going to stay with you. So that can make a huge difference. So that covers our example CV. Obviously marked it up a lot now, but hopefully you can see the way we've thought about this. And if you can structure your CV like this, you're going to be on to a winner. And as I said, you would structure your master like this, and then you can quickly tweak it for specific applications. Okay, so hopefully that's made it much clearer in terms of how you structure a great CV. And remember, it needs to do 3 things. Make the target role explicit, make the match obvious, and make the impact as quickly as possible. That's it. Not perfect wording, not clever formatting, not more content, just structure, clarity, and relevance. And in this day and age, AI can accelerate this process significantly, but only if the underlying thinking is sound and proper. If not, it just makes the CV worse. And companies and banks are becoming much more sophisticated and able to spot an AI generated CV. So in this video, I really wanted to make sure I go through the fundamentals and get the thinking right. But if you're interested in seeing a video on how you can use AI to supercharge this, then leave a comment below. And if you want to see how this framework can be applied to you, I personally work one-to-one with a small group of people who are serious about breaking into investment banking or finance in 2026. And it won't be generic advice. We will pressure test your background and how it is being perceived, what your CV is signaling, and whether that aligns to your target roles. And this will be done via a strategy call, and we'll make sure you leave with clarity on where you fit, what's holding you back, and what you need to focus on moving forward. So if you're serious about landing a banking role in 2026, there is a link to a free strategy call in the description. And otherwise, if you found this video useful, then you'll definitely like this next one. So check it out. I'll see you there.